What's up, short attention span history nerds? I'm Mike Perry, and you're watching 10-Minute History. The Trail of Tears devastated Native American tribes, killing thousands of Native Americans in just a few short years. Survivors of the Trail of Tears had a difficult time resettling in the new territory, as many of their elders and men were among the dead. So, today we're going to take a look back at what led to the Trail of Tears and who was responsible. But before we get started, I want to know what you think about this new format. If you're new to 10-Minute History, take a look at my previous videos as a frame of reference. Also, be sure to subscribe to 10-Minute History and let me know what other Native American stories you would like to hear about. Okay, let's go back to when the United States of America was only half the size it is today and cotton was king. The United States of America is the greatest country in the world, not just because we have the Dallas Cowboys, but because we have the most advanced and well-funded medical system, the most diverse population of any country, as well as the greatest form of individual liberty. We also contribute the lion's share to the world's most economically challenged countries. But while America is undoubtedly the best country, we didn't achieve this status without several black eyes. One of our biggest black eyes was something called the Trail of Tears. This was a nasty act perpetrated on Native Americans living in cotton-rich states by then Democrat President Andrew Jackson. That's right, the $20 bill guy. Jackson hated Native Americans, and I mean really hated them. He forced tens of thousands of them off their land by marching them on foot thousands of miles away to an unknown, recently acquired territory west of the Mississippi. Jackson knew a large number of natives were going to die, and he made sure that this was going to happen. No provisions were made for the natives, and the 1,000-mile journey was mandatory. So just like he planned, thousands of natives indeed died during the relocation. Now, way back in the early 1800s, Americans, particularly those who lived on the western frontier, often feared the Native Americans. They saw them as scary alien people with strange customs who occupied land that American settlers wanted for its rich soil. America's first president, George Washington, believed that the best way to solve the native issue was simply to civilize them. Washington wanted to make them less scary and more like white Americans. He did this by encouraging them to convert to Christianity, learn to speak and read English, and adopt American practices like individual ownership of land and other types of property. Basically, he wanted them to adopt this new trend going around: capitalism. Of all the nations living in the area, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Creek, and Cherokee people embraced these customs and became known as the 5 civilized tribes. Unfortunately, Jackson wasn't pleased with their efforts. The 5 tribes' land, located in parts of Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee, was valuable. Very valuable. So, state officials got together to see how they could acquire this valuable land for the lowest amount of money. After much deliberation, they settled on the solution to drive the natives out of the South and steal their land. It seemed stealing the land was a lot quicker and cheaper than a long drawn-out negotiation and court proceedings. Several states passed laws limiting natives' rights in an effort to make relocating more appealing. One such case brought before the Supreme Court was Worcester versus Georgia in 1832. The U.S. Supreme Court objected to these state practices and said that native nations were sovereign nations, quote, in which the laws of Georgia and other states can have no force, end quote. Samuel Worcester, a missionary, and a bunch of other non-Indian missionaries were convicted by Georgia law for illegally living in Cherokee territory in the state of Georgia. Worcester was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but appealed the ruling, arguing that this sentence violated treaties made between Indian nations and the United States federal government by imposing state law on Cherokee lands. The court ruled in Worcester's favor, declaring that the Cherokee Nation was subject only to federal law, not to state law, and that the Supremacy Clause barred interference by the state of Georgia. Chief Justice John Marshall argued, quote, "The Cherokee Nation, then, is a distinct community occupying its own territory in which the laws of Georgia can have no force. The whole intercourse between the United States and this nation is, by our Constitution and laws, vested in the government of the United States." End quote. But the Jackson-led government wasn't going to let a little thing like the Supreme Court stop them. Democrat President Andrew Jackson noted in 1832, if no one intended to enforce the Supreme Court's ruling, which he certainly didn't, then the decisions would fall stillborn. Jackson was going to steal their land come hell or high water. President Jackson had long been an advocate of what he called Indian removal, or simply moving or killing Indians off American soil. As an Army general, he had spent years leading brutal campaigns against the Creeks in Georgia and Alabama and the Seminoles in Florida, campaigns that resulted in the transfer of hundreds of thousands of acres of land from Indian nations to American farmers. In 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act. This act gave the government the power to exchange native-held land in the cotton-producing states east of the Mississippi for land to the west in the new Indian colonization zone that the United States had acquired as part of the Louisiana Purchase. This Indiana territory is located in present-day Oklahoma. The law required the government to negotiate removal treaties fairly, voluntarily, and peacefully. It forbade the president or anyone else from coercing native nations into giving up their land. However, President Jackson and his government frequently ignored the letter of the law, even the laws they wrote, and forced Native Americans to vacate lands that they had lived on longer than America existed. Now, in the winter of 1831, under threat of invasion by the United States Army, the Choctaw became the first nation to be expelled from its land. They made the journey to Indian Territory on foot without any food, supplies, or other help from the government. Jackson's plan of killing natives was now in motion. Thousands of people died along the way. It was, as one Choctaw leader told an Alabama newspaper, a trail of tears and death. In 1836, the federal government went after the Creeks and drove them off their land. 3,500 of the 15,000 Creeks who set out for Oklahoma did not survive the trip. The Cherokee Nation, however, was divided. Some wanted to stay and fight for their land. Others thought it was better to agree to leave in exchange for cold hard cash and a bunch of other empty promises. A year earlier, in 1835, some self-appointed representatives of the Cherokee Nation negotiated the Treaty of New Choctaw, which traded all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi for $5 million, which is somewhere around $100 million in today's economy. It also gave them relocation assistance and compensation for lost property. To the federal government, the treaty was a done deal, but many of the Cherokee felt betrayed. After all, the negotiators did not represent the tribal government or anyone else. It's even called into question whether or not the negotiators were even Cherokee. The instrument in question is not the act of our nation, wrote Cherokee Chief John Ross in a letter to the U.S. Senate protesting the treaty. We are not parties to its covenants. It has not received the sanction of our people. Nearly 16,000 Cherokee signed Ross's petition, but Jackson's Congress approved the treaty anyways. There was no way in hell they were going to let the Cherokee keep their land. By 1838, only about 2,000 Cherokee had left their Georgia homeland for Indian Territory. Democrat President Martin Van Buren, now President of the United States, sent 7,000 soldiers to expedite the removal process. The troops forced the Cherokee into stockades and looted their homes and belongings. Then, they marched the Indians more than 1,200 miles to Indian Territory. Whooping cough, typhus, dysentery, cholera, and starvation were epidemic along the way, and historians estimated that more than 5,000 Cherokee died as a result of the journey. In 1840, tens of thousands of Native Americans had been driven off their land in the southeast states and forced to move across the Mississippi River into Indian Territory. The federal government promised that their land would remain unmolested forever, but just like in times past, failed to keep their promise. Indian Territory shrank and shrank. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state of the U.S., and Indian Territory was gone for good. That's the 10-minute history story of the Trail of Tears. If you would like to help support 10-Minute History, considering purchasing some of our merchandise listed below. It's not your usual shirts and hats, but rather very inexpensive, useful items like journals, notebooks, and coloring books that our staff has created and designed. If you like short history videos with a little sarcasm and humor, please consider subscribing to 10-Minute History. And if you particularly like this video, give it a thumbs up. And please leave your comments in the comment section below. It really helps the YouTube algorithm, which is constantly changing. Until next time.